Good afternoon. I'm Tammy Epps, and I'm the Director of Media Relations here at Prisma Health. And we know as professionals that stress in our busy society is a lot. So this month, April, is National Stress Month, stress awareness. So what we decided to do is to put together this great panel of our Prisma Health experts to give our community a little bit of information about stress. And they'll share with you things you should know about stress and when you might need some help. And so on our panel today, we have Dr. Brittany Peters, who's one of our psychiatrists here at Prisma Health. We have Carmenlita Sayles, who's one of our therapists here at Prisma Health, and Lanita-Sunshine Smith, who's also one of our counselors. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today. We have a list of questions that we will ask them. If any of our media partners have a question at the end, please put that in the chat and we will attempt to answer that question by one of our professionals. So with that, we're gonna pop up Dr. Peters and ask her to unmute. And hey, Dr. Peters, good to see you.
Hi, good to see you.
Good, thank you so much for taking time out of your clinical schedule to join us.
Absolutely.
So, stress, we got some stress these days.
Yes, I would say so.
So tell me, what people would, give a definition of stress?
So I think if you were to go on the internet, you'd probably find a lot of definitions for stress. But as a doctor, I think about things from the biological perspective, and so I think of stress as being sort of a series of processes that occur in the body whenever you encounter something that might be threatening or potentially dangerous. So whenever that happens, we get sort of a neurochemical cascade that happens, starts in the brain and sort of goes down through the body, lots of different organs in the body and through the endocrine system, and creates this response that we call stress. So for example, if you were to encounter a mountain lion, so big source of stress, your body would want to get away from that. So it would start, your heart would start pumping blood really quickly to all of your organs, and your muscles would start twitching so that you can get away, and your breathing would pick up so that you can, get oxygen to all of your muscles and get away from this big threat that you have. Regardless of the stressor, our body will respond in a similar manner, no matter if it's a mountain lion or a math test. And so when our body responds in that way, sometimes we experience that as being unpleasant or uncomfortable, and it can be distressing for us. And so that is sort of what creates this this term or this sensation that we experience as stress.
Well, thank you for that. I think it's so interesting the way everybody's body is, handles everything a little bit differently. So thank you. What about what would you think about are the most common causes of stress in today's society?
So in today's society, I think, it's a little bit dependent on your developmental stage and where you are in life and that sort of thing. So I work primarily with adolescents and children in the community. And so when I think of the primary sources of stress for them, academics certainly comes to mind, school comes to mind, peer relationships, relationships with family members, and then also, something that kids deal with nowadays that maybe wasn't such an issue before is, the stress of social media and the extra peer pressure that can add. For adults, the most common sources of stress are, again, going to be relationships. That's a big stressor for most people, whether that's friends, family, romantic partners, that sorts of thing. And then also, finances can be very stressful. The workplace can be very stressful for a lot of people. And so those are the primary sources of stress in today's society.
And how does chronic stress impact your mental and physical health?
That's a really good question. So because, sort of as I described earlier, stress is it's a biological process that occurs in the body and affects your biological systems. There can be physical effects from stress. So chronic stress that, occurs over a long period of time and repeatedly can lead to higher blood pressure, It can increase chronic pain in patients that experience a lot of pain. It can affect sleep and cause sleep disturbances. It can lead to weight gain. And it actually can even weaken the immune system if you have prolonged stress over a prolonged period of time, and decrease your ability to fight infection and that sort of thing. From a mental health aspect, stress can make us more susceptible to having anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, diagnoses like post-traumatic stress disorder. That we can become more susceptible to all of those things if we're exposed to prolonged periods of stress.
All right, thank you. We're going to go to Carmelita. All right.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for
Good.
having me.
Thank you for joining us. So, as behavioral care professionals, are you seeing significantly more people complaining of stress and anxiety?
I would say I don't know that it's necessarily increased in terms of the number. I think what's happening, at least with the patients I see, by the time they get to me, um, it has simply compounded, um, and everything feels much more pronounced. Depending on how long they may have been waiting or the access that they may have to mental health services. But generally, by the time that I see them, there are some outward signs of stress or distress.
What are the first steps that someone should think about if they feel like they're not managing their stress themselves?
One of the things I encourage my patients to do is to be mindful, like Dr. Peters said, of some of the physiological and the psychological cues, that their body may give them. And usually those will be sort of the first inklings that something is out of the ordinary. If it's physiological, they may report increased headaches or migraines or increased heart rates, muscle tension, body aches. They may complain often of like GI issues or stomach issues, and even some appetite changes. Um, Typically on the emotional side, some of the cues that they may get, they just may notice that they're much more irritable than normal, or that, they're having some maybe memory issues or feeling more forgetful, or maybe isolating or just withdrawing emotionally. And, so those are some sort of red flags to kind of help, clue them in. So I encourage them to really be mindful of those.
And then what are the first steps they should take if they realize, wait a minute, I'm seeing some of these symptoms that you just talked about. What should I do about it?
I always encourage them to first start with their primary care providers because, I think it's a good idea always to rule out any sort of organic or medical problems to make sure, because I would not want them to be ignoring something that may be medical and more serious. And then secondly, reach out to a therapist or a behavioral health professional to kind of help.
Why is it not a good idea to use alcohol as a stress reliever?
It's a way of coping, but it is a maladaptive way of coping. And, it's one of those that can quickly get out of hand. And all it really does is mask the larger issue. It doesn't really address whatever may be the causal factor for the stress.
What
So you
about
really don't.
food?
I'm sorry.
I said, what about foods? People go to certain foods. They want to eat a whole pack of Oreos, whatever it is.
I think it's the same thing. Too much of anything is not a great idea, and it can certainly become another maladaptive way of coping. You don't want to compound that with other medical problems. So you're looking for balance.
Yeah, I love that. We're going to go back to Dr. Peters. Dr. Peters, so what are some of the latest advancements in treating stress-related disorders?
So the tried and true things are going to continue to be very helpful, which might sound a little bit boring, but this is kind of how it goes. So exercise can be helpful for treating stress. Maintaining a balanced diet is helpful for stress. Getting adequate amounts of sleep is helpful for stress. So the latest and greatest studies all tell us that those are the things that are going to continue to help us be resilient and fight stress and manage our stress when it comes on. In terms of like specific treatments, depending on the kind of stress you're having and what's causing your stress, there are different kinds of therapies that can be helpful. There's cognitive behavioral therapy, which can be helpful for stress. Mindfulness-based stress reduction is another kind of therapy that can be helpful for stress. Those both have a lot of data behind them to support helping patients that are experiencing significant stressful events. If you've experienced a significant trauma, there are particular kinds of therapy that can be helpful for trauma. There's trauma-specific or trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and other trauma-specific therapies that can be helpful. So, again, just like Carmenlita said, going to a mental health professional and kind of getting them to sort through and help out kind of what the most helpful treatment is going to be for you is really a really good first step.
What about medications? I know a lot of people are concerned about having to take medications for different things. So what about, medications that help manage stress, and what are the potential side effects of those kinds of things?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So there aren't really specific medicines that help with stress in and of itself. Sometimes stress can lead to other disorders like major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you, do seek help from a professional and are diagnosed with one of those disorders, which medication would be indicated for, the most common medications that are prescribed for those groups of disorders are called SSRIs. So those medications take some time to work. There's nothing that you're going to take that's just going to magically melt everything away. That's not how the medications work. But if you take them consistently as prescribed over time, they can be helpful in managing a lot of the symptoms that we were discussing earlier, that, fatigue, lack of energy, irritability, anxiousness, those sorts of things. And in terms of side effects, the most common things being common, stomach aches and headaches are the most common side effects with medication. Those typically get better after you've been on the medicine for a few days. And then, more serious side effects can occur in some situations, but, I would encourage you to talk to your doctor about those because they're kind of different from medication to medication. And it would be a lot to go through every specific one here. But I think it's good to be, informed of what the side effects could be and make sure that you're asking all the questions that you want to of your doctor and making sure that you're advocating for yourself and your doctor is giving you the information that you need about your medications, if that's the route that's recommended for you.
Good, thank you. And so we're going to go to Lanita-Sunshine. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. So Dr. Peters was talking a little bit about some of the lifestyle changes and habits that significantly reduce stress. Tell me about how you work with your patients on those kinds of things.
Yeah, so certainly to piggyback on Dr. Peters, we want to make sure that we're doing those tried and true things, exercising regularly, even a short walk will help, eating healthy, including your fruits and veggies, getting enough sleep. That's hard for some people. We want to aim for about 7 to 9 hours, but certainly seek assistance from your medical professional if you feel like you're not able to get a restful sleep. Enjoy hobbies that you love, any of the activities that you love doing, because they will help us emit some of those happy chemicals that will increase our mood. Limit stimulants. So also backing off of Carmelita, we want to kind of not engage in that caffeine, alcohol, those sugary drinks, and seek help if needed.
Yeah. What about things, non-therapeutic things like mindfulness and meditation? How can they be integrated into daily routines to help alleviate stress?
Mindfulness and meditation are very helpful. We want to start our day with a brief meditation, maybe just focusing on our breathing for about 5 minutes or so to calm and set our tone. When eating, again, practice the mindful eating, using our 5 senses so that we're not just rushing through the meal, but we are enjoying it. Taking brief walks, also using those 5 senses. to help us to notice the sensations in our body and to clear our mind, along with preparing a sleep experience. So before bed, we want to reflect on what we're grateful for and letting go out of anything that's out of our control.
Man, when you said a sleep experience, I think I automatically got sleepy. Like, that's the whole way you said it. Thank you so much. What about, you just talked about it. How important is sleep in managing your stress?
So sleep is incredibly important for managing stress. When you don't get enough sleep, your body and mind are less equipped to handle stress. So it leads to that increased anxiety and irritability, which then leads its way to all of those racing thoughts or rumination that happens. And it's caused by stress, anxiety, overactive mind, struggling to wind down. So our daily worries, unresolved problems, anticipation of future events, they can all trigger that rumination or that mental loop, and it makes it hard to relax. So we want to make sure that we are giving ourselves a chance to not amplify those things during the quiet of the night.
So tell me about the sleep experience. Well, I mean, what would you tell people that should look like?
Exactly how it sounds. So instead of us thinking about routines, which sometimes our brain rejects, we want to think about sleep as an experience. Set the mood for yourself. So start off by maybe changing the lighting, dull the light, increase some white noise or sleep sounds. Do a brain dump before bed so that you're not sitting with all of these thoughts in your head, but you're getting them out and on paper so that you can move forward. Practice your deep breathing. You can use some guided meditations. YouTube has a lot of great free ones. Practice our muscle relaxation, tense and relax our muscles from head to toe to get them prepared for bed. And then always what helps is disconnecting from these screens. So if we need to use some visualization, do that. Think about your favorite things. But give your brain about 30 minutes before bed without that screen so that you can also limit the stimulant of the screen.
So when you say no screens, you mean no TV, no phones, no iPads, no all the things, right?
None of them, the watches, and you could even set the light on those things so that the light is dim. I shut my notifications off. So if I get them, I'll see them in the morning. If it's an emergency, I guess you better have my house number.
If you still have a house number.
If you still have one.
All right, we're going to go back to Dr. Peters. All right, Dr. Peters, what about our kiddos? So as parents, I'm a parent myself. Of course, I have an adult son now. I have grandchildren now. But anyway, so we're, trying to figure out how to help our kids. I mean, how does stress affect children, and can it impact their development?
Yes. So let me first and foremost say everyone's going to experience stress. Every kid is going to have stress in their life. There's absolutely no way that you're going to protect your child from ever experiencing any stress, nor should we try to. That's not the aim. Chronic, prolonged, repeated stress can affect brain development. So there are, certain parts of our brain that regulate emotions like anxiety, impulse control, irritability. And if you are exposed to repeated chronic stress as a young child, there are studies that show that the development of those centers of your brain can not develop correctly. And that can cause long-term issues with anxiety, emotion regulation, impulse control, and ultimately your ability to develop relationships. Now, I don't say that to create a panic or to say, oh no, we need to protect our children from stress, because actually one of the greatest ways to help them is to help them experience stress in a healthy way. So when they do experience stress, they have a parent or an adult that's modeling for them how they can really respond to that in a healthy way, and how they can regulate emotionally in a healthy way. And that is really what's going to cause resilience for that particular child. Not, I think our a lot of times as parents, our inclination is to try to shield them and protect them, so for example, the child that doesn't want to go to preschool or doesn't want to be dropped off, the solution to that is not taking them to preschool and not having them ever experience that kind of stress or anxiety, but sort of helping to guide them in ways that might help them to self-soothe and learn to comfort themselves when they are stressed, so that they can build that resilience and they can have confidence that, hey, I can do difficult things and things can be stressful, but I can also come out on the other side.
Oh, that's a great answer. Okay, so tell me about digital overload in our kids. We all know, I just had a conversation yesterday with a friend who was trying to decide when his children were going to get their first cell phones and all the drama that was around that. So how do we think that stress in children is being related to digital overload?
Yeah, and I think, the answer for that is different for everyone in terms of when's the most appropriate time. And it very much depends on the child and their personality and their level of responsibility and all those things. However, I think digital overload definitely plays a part in stress. It used to be before the days of cell phones and social media and those sorts of things. After school, you can come home and kind of unplug from that peer pressure and unplug from knowing what all the other kids at school are doing and who's wearing what and who's buying this and who's at this vacation and that kind of thing. But now it's just sort of a repeated in your face kind of thing. And so like we were talking about before, when stress is chronic, repeated over and over again, and you're not getting a break to recover from stress, that can be an issue. So certainly, for children, if they are having, exposure to social media or to screens and that sort of thing, having break time where they can recover and do other things that, promote resilience like exercise and getting enough rest and those sorts of things is really, really important. So when you're considering, do we allow our child, exposure to these different things, those are all things that need to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and that was the next point is what kind of strategies can parents, and I think you talked about a few of those, what kind of strategies can parents use to help their kids, with all the things that, the screen time and help making sure they build resilience?
Right. I think, one of the things that comes up in studies over and over as a positive predictive factor for developing resilience is having close relationships with adults that are reliable and dependable, and that themselves can regulate their emotions. And so if nothing else, learning yourself to learn to deal with stress and manage your own stress and showing, your children how to do that in a healthy manner can be really, really helpful. And again, like I said, managing time on the screen. There are, some helpful things about screens and social media. The studies aren't all negative. There is some benefit, especially, during the COVID times when everyone was isolated and we weren't having a lot of, in-person socialization. There was some benefit to having those social contacts, but it's again, like we were saying earlier, everything in moderation. So you're not having that repeated sort of input of, what's going on with everyone else in the world.
Good deal. Thank you. We're going to go to Carmelita. All right, Carmelita, I saw you shaking your head a couple of times with Dr. Peters talking about those children. So didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add on that.
No, I co-sign everything that she said. And I think really, like she said, the key is finding, those methods that work best for your family, because it's gonna vary from family to family.
Okay. What about workplace stress? We know that can be difficult to deal with. What are some practical tips for people managing stress in their workplace?
I think, well, first and foremost, I would encourage, everybody to investigate their employers. Most employers have an employee assistance program. Don't hesitate to reach out. They can be, a valuable source of support. And if you have the capability to have any control over your schedule, maybe especially in terms of job responsibilities, maybe try prioritizing, responsibilities and breaking them down into more manageable tasks. And if you have the ability to delegate, do some delegation. Also, just like if you entered a building and one of the first things I do is always scan for the exits. Build in some emotional exit strategies throughout your day. Like, when you take your breaks, be intentional about devoting some time to some self-care, whether if it's just sitting quietly, listening to some soft music, or, going for a walk. I have a walking pad in my office. So trying to be more intentional about things like that.
What are the Sunday scaries? Is that a thing? Does that mean you have depression or are anxious?
Did you say Sunday scaries?
Sunday scaries.
To me, I really believe, and I've heard a number of people talk about it. It's sort of the anticipatory anxiety of like, what's the next week going to hold? Sort of being fearful of those things that you can't control, and trying to trust that whatever comes up, that you will manage it. You may not have to manage it alone. It may mean that you seek out some support, but that's honestly not uncommon, especially at the beginning of a new week.
How can people identify their stress triggers and then figure out, okay, these are the things that trigger me, and then develop strategies to cope with them?
I think at the heart of it is you're gonna have to do some self-reflection. And when we do that and maybe create some quiet time for ourselves, a lot of times we'll start to notice patterns. Gosh, like when I was in this setting, I realized that, I felt more tense, or, when I left that environment, I had a headache. That self-reflection may come through some meditation. Like Lanita mentioned, it may come through some journaling, or it may come through seeking, outside support, whether that's, therapist, psychiatrist, or even your medical provider.
What about, do you think about specific stressors impacting different age groups or demographics more significantly?
Yeah, and I think Dr. Peters did a great job of highlighting some of the stressors that our adolescents tend to face, that tend to be, academic and social. For our younger adults, a lot of what we see is usually stress related to finances, family, work or career. In our older adult population, I tend to hear more people reporting about just, worries about financial insecurity, and if there are health issues, sort of that sense of loss of independence, and that they maybe can't do some of the things that they once did, and, relying on other people just out of necessity. That can feel really distressing for older adults. And also some may find themselves in a, caregiving capacity, whether it's caring for a spouse or another family member.
And what kind of advice, do you have for those people who have some things that are kind of outside of their own control?
One, recognizing that, everybody wants to feel like they have some sense of agency over their lives, even the stress, and trying to improve upon it and make it better. I say normalize, one, that, like Dr. Peters says, stress is normal, but also normalize seeking help and asking for what you need, even if it comes from a professional.
That's great. Thank you. We're going to go to Lanita-Sunshine. All right, Lanita. What about social interaction? I mean, what role does social interaction play in stress management?
So social interaction not only provides emotional support and distraction, but it also helps release our happy chemicals in the brain. So when you connect with others, your body releases serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, and dopamine. And these chemicals help to boost our mood and reduce our stress. They also promote feelings of happiness and well-being. So engaging in social activities can be a powerful way to manage by both providing emotional support and in aiding in the release of those beneficial chemicals.
What about when you're seeking support from others and dealing with the stress of, I guess, kind of what Carmelita was saying about having to go to others for support, and then I almost think about it in the way of like, when do you do that? And when is it maybe not the right thing to do? You know, what do you think about that?
So you definitely need to know your support system and build a support system ahead of time. And a support system isn't just one or two people, it's making sure that you have a team of people that can provide you with what you need for that particular stressor possibly. But you want to practice open communication with your friends and loved ones. Involvement in local resources such as our parks and recs, our libraries, our religious communities, and community centers can be helpful, but seeking professional help when stress is overwhelming is always the thing to do. We can also use Prisma Health's website, right? So they have some wonderful recommendations for engaging, including events and classes to help us flourish all year.
Yeah. What about when you have to make a decision about stress that's being caused by other family members or other, I'll say associates, whether it's somebody in your family or somebody in your circle? What about how do you deal with that?
You definitely want to work on setting boundaries. Setting your boundaries is reminding yourself that sometimes my saying no to someone else is my saying yes to me. And it's okay. It's not me being rude, it's me practicing self-care in such a selfless way that I'm able to give to others from my overpour and not a place of emptiness.
Good deal. I love that. So I think as we think about stress, I think it's you know, the compartmentalizing, like the things you can control, the things you can't control, kind of thing, and then what do you do about all those things? So I don't think we have any questions from our media partners. We have a couple of stations on, and but what I wanted to do is go back to everyone and just give you a quick second to think about what's the one thing that you would like to say to the community about stress, that you would share if you didn't have all these other great questions that we've asked. So what would be your one thing?
Well, mine would be to, most importantly, be kind to yourself. So remember that we're all human beings doing human things, having human experiences, and it's okay. But we also need to remember that every single superhero has a flaw. So use our flaws for our superpowers.
Okay, wait, I have a question now. So one of our media partners was going to ask about older adults. Oh, but they were stressed. They said that we answered their question already. So good job. Look at us. So good. All right. So yes. So I'm sorry. Let's do that. Let's run that one back, Lanita, one more time. Your thought again.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, remember to be kind to yourself. Remember that human beings do human things and it's okay. And that every superhero had a flaw. So find ways to turn your flaws into your superpowers.
I love that. All right, Carmelita, I'm coming to you. Okay, what thought would you give the community?
You know, I think I would say, remember that you're not in a universe of one. And if you're having a difficult time, you don't have to hoard that experience all to yourself. You know, don't be afraid to reach out and to ask for some help.
I love that. All right, Dr. Peters.
I think I would say, you know, stress is not something that we want to avoid or be scared of or try to push down. You know, what we resist persists is kind of the what I'm thinking. But, you know, I think everyone here has given a lot of, you know, great tips for how to manage stress and recognize stress. So when those things come up, make sure you're taking time for yourself to help manage your stress. And, you know, ultimately, you know, like we were saying earlier, that helps your kids and loved ones learn to manage their stress better too. So we can help each other as a community in that way.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to our great Prisma Health experts, Dr. Brittany Peters, Lanita-Sunshine Smith, and Carmenlita Sayles. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy clinical schedule to come and share some information with our community. Thank you to our media partners who took the time out to also share this information. And we want to remind you to try to help you manage your stress. Prisma Health is all about taking care of our community, and this is another way that we're doing that. So with that, Everybody have a great day and make sure you're managing that stress out there. Bye. Have a great day.